nog gaan kijken. Ben je nog aan het kijken? Ben je nog aan het kijken? Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Met Xander de Rijke.
My advice to you is seek professional help.
Hello everybody and welcome to Ben je nog aan het kijken, the podcast where we talk to guests about their favorite shows or about their career in television. I am your host Xander de Rijke and welcome to the final episode of this season, and boy do I have a story to tell you guys. As every fan of the podcast knows, I always try to do something special for the last episode of every season. A big name, maybe a big special centered on a really popular show, and this season is no different. Staying in line with some of the episodes this season, I went for nostalgia and wanted to do a special episode about a show people have been suggesting for over a year. Beestenbos is Boos, also known in English as The Animals of Farthing. If you grew up watching children's television in the 90s, then there's a big chance this show was one of your favorites and also your first childhood trauma. The animated show based on the books by Colin Dan ran for 3 seasons in which you could see the animals moving to a new forest, fighting off blue foxes and rats, falling in love and of course losing those loved ones along the way. So I went on a quest to talk to someone who helped create the show. The Animals of Farthing is a British animated series commissioned by the European Broadcasting Union between 1992 and 1995. It was produced by Tel'imagination, based in London, and La Fabrique, based in Montpellier in France. But it also aired in other European countries. The first countries to air the series were Norway, Germany, the Netherlands, of course Belgium, Ireland, Italy and the United Kingdom in January of 1993. The show itself was directed by Philippe Leclerc, a French animator, and somebody by the name of Elphin-Lloyd Jones. Unfortunately, my French is not up to date and I did not pursue Philippe Leclerc. Going after Elphin-Lloyd Jones was even harder because the man had zero to none internet presence. His IMDb credits were limited to directing, designing and drawing The Animals of Farthing and another little show you might know, Noah's Island, about a polar bear saving extinct species on a floating island. Oiski poiski. I was looking for Elphin like I was stalking old classmates on Facebook and eventually had 2 hits on an Elphin-Lloyd Jones, who had designed the backdrops for a local pantomime in a village called Blewbury, and an Elphin-Lloyd Jones who had drawn cartoons during COVID for the Blewbury Gazette. Guessing it was the same Elphin, I contacted both parties but I did not hear back from them for over 3 weeks. I almost had given up hope until I got a mail from Elphin-Lloyd Jones himself stating, "My friends told me you are looking for me." We got to talking through email and it turned out not only he was the Elphin-Lloyd Jones that made The Animals of Farthing, he was also absolutely charming, funny and keen to do the podcast. One slight hitch, he did not do Zoom. His preferred ways of talking were in person, on the phone or through written letters. So I took a gamble, packed up my equipment and went to Blewbury where Elphin was living a retired life. I spent 3 days in Blewbury exploring the village, talking and drinking with Elphin until the late hours, looking at his art, discussing our upbringing, comedy and philosophy and even joining his monthly pub quiz. I went looking for a podcast guest online and came back from England having met an incredible, talented, smart and lovely man who I hope to see again later this summer when Blewbury isn't a giant puddle. You will notice I cut myself out of this podcast for a pretty big part, and this is mostly because I wanted Elf to take front and center and just leave you for an hour listening to his Attenborough-like voice and the clicking of his lighter. Please welcome to the podcast, all the way from Blewbury, my friend Elphin-Lloyd Jones.
The little reminisce I was going to give you is jumping ahead a bit, but it doesn't matter. While it's in my mind, I may as well tell you about it.
Of course.
When we were going in for the 3rd series, we were called in to Switzerland, where all the clients, which was the European Broadcasting Union, and the heads of the children's programming. So they were a pretty high-flying bunch. Brilliant people, of course, masters of their business. They knew what they were doing and they knew what they wanted. So you had to walk in knowing what your answers would be. And it was suggested, I forget which country suggested it, that the animals of Farthing would be worth doing a third series. So we were called in with our ideas and the pictures which I'd done to accompany these new characters. And we sat in this large room, and they seemed to respond very well to it. But I won't mention the country, but one person stood up and said, "I have a problem." Deathly silence. You know. I'm looking around. Oh, here we go, down the Swanee. And this person said, "I strongly object to the amount of violence that is exhibited in the animation of the Animals of Farthing Wood. And since you're director, I'd like you, A, to explain it, and I personally won't back it while you have that degree of violence in it." And I said, "Well, is there an example that can illustrate to everyone here what your worry is?" He said, "Yes," he said, "the hedgehogs." He said that killing the hedgehogs like that was outrageous. It was too violent. It was disgusting. You know, it offended everything. And I really couldn't back that going in front of children. I said, "Well, would you mind?" And we got the video out, you know, Steam VHS. We shoved it in and we went to that particular scene. When that scene was being created in the studio, I'd seen it because I'd storyboarded it anyway, and I thought, this is a sensitive scene, a delicate scene. So I laid it out and I animated myself, just to make sure I felt comfortable. And also, I got a great team of animators, really wonderful animators, and I didn't want if there was going to be a backlash, I didn't want it landing on them. You know, I'm at the front of the ship, so I may as well go down with it. Anyway, we ran this video of this very short scene of these beautiful little hedgehogs, which were a charming old married couple, and they were about to cross this very busy highway. All the other animals had got across, except the hedgehogs, who were a bit nervous about it. In the end, the male hedgehog says to his partner, "Okay, let's go." And of course, over the hill comes this damn big lorry, and woof. But what you see is virtually 1/25th of a second of a tiny stripe of red. You do not see anything violent. And the moment that has happened, and the wheels have gone past, you cut to a long shot of the animals, horrified, obviously a quiet moment while I wanted the audience to realize that the horror had struck and they recognized it. It wasn't the show does not go on for a moment while that happens. Eventually, of course, they pull themselves together and they move on. But due respect and due recognition of a very serious scene has been given. After we ran this, there was a long silence in this committee room, and to be fair, and I admire this person very much, he got up and he said, "I withdraw all my objections."
Oh no. Come on, dear. Better get moving.
All right, don't fuss. I'm coming.
Trouble is, when the cars move, I want to stop. Come on, dear.
I can't.
Please.
Don't curl up.
Please.
Whatever you do, dearest, don't curl up.
No.
The first one happened by accident.
Okay.
My co-director, who I created the company with, he wasn't an animator, never done animation in his life, but he had worked for the BBC, and so he knew what was happening, and he'd heard about the EBU proposing to animate a series for children. And I said, oh, yeah, what? Well, it's a book by Colin Dan, which is one of the things that were chosen. I said, well, why aren't we pitching? Well, you haven't got a chance. I happen to know that it's sewn up. And I said, well, it's not sewn up until they say no. The meeting was the following Monday. I got about 4 days, and being a somewhat rebellious, obstinate little chap, I went back to my own studio at home, and I sat down and I drew all the way through the night and the day, and those pictures you saw, the very first ones, you know, against a photographic background. There was no time for me to paint backgrounds, but I could get the characters on. Mm-hmm. And I put this all together with the help of my co-director who wrote a pitch, whatever, and we turned up at the meeting, invited ourselves virtually. And all of a sudden, the shift changes. When they see what we're proposing, what might have helped is, of course, that my background was big animation series. I animated for and directed for Hanna-Barbera when stuff came over into this country. So I was used to big shows. The other studios weren't used to that kind of volume and organization for a big show. And I think that probably helped. Mm-hmm. Also, if you like, I think the designs I did were more in line with what my knowledge and experience on big shows for large distribution. Mm-hmm. You can't be too fussy, you know, like with the hedgehogs. You know, you don't have every spike on a hedgehog. Otherwise, an animator is going to finish the scene for 5 seconds about a year later. And they're not very friendly with you for asking you to do it. But that's... The wind changed and came in our direction. So that's how we got to do the first Animals of Farthing Wood.
Yeah, but it looks like a complicated production because every country in Europe was involved on this one.
In the financing of it and distribution, our French friends, who I got to know very well, also had a studio, and because of the volume of work, a wonderful studio, and my dear friend Philippe Leclerc in Montpellier, brilliant animator, wonderful director. He and I met up, got to know each other, and knew we could work together. He had a sense of humour. Thank heavens. And he would unmercifully take the mickey out of the English. And which is a kind of being quite a lot of me as Welsh anyway, so it never worried me. No, it was a good relationship. But I hinted the other day that our French friends, brilliant animators, wonderful team. They do try, as most animators do, if the instinct hits them, they will try to insert something into the scene which is peculiarly their own. And would you like me to tell you the story of the 4 or 5 second scene?
Of course. Yeah.
Right. Well, because I was the overlooking director and our company held the contract, the rushes were sent over, the preliminary films, before it was edited, were sent over from Montpellier, and I would go through them with my editor in the editing suite and just check that technically it was okay. And there are hundreds and hundreds of scenes in a 22.5-minute show, of course. And they're whizzing through on the screen, and I'm looking at them, and I said to the editor, just roll back a second. There's something I'm not quite... What is it? One of the common things was cell flash, where the light would hit the acetate underneath the rostrum camera, and you'd get a little flare, or the acetate had bumped up and changed the colouring of it. Tiny things which only an editor would spot usually. But we rolled back to this short scene. Beautiful little woodland scene, lovely background, and there were 2 rocks positioned in the front, and suddenly out of it came the adder character, the snake character, winding her way up into the scene and speaking with a hissy voice. It's a nice little scene, lovely to animate, great fun. And the editor says, "What's your problem? There's nothing wrong with it." I said, "Have you seen those rocks?" And it suddenly dawned on him that actually the rocks had been created in such a way that they looked like a reclining nude female form. So I phoned Philippe in Montpellier and I said, "Did you really think you'd get that past me?" And his response was, "Well, 80% of the studio didn't think it would, but 20% did, including me. So I'd lost the bet." This was February of the year. A few weeks later, we're into April. Mm-hmm. And of course, more rushes are coming in on a weekly basis. It's all fast and furious. And there's a scene there where the two weasels end up in a tavern. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the male weasel, if I recall. He's underneath a barrel of dripping beer. And he's getting sloshed. Mm-hmm. And, right, so this is my chance for revenge, you know. It's a British-French thing, isn't it? You know, you can't let it go. So I send him an email saying, "I'm awfully sorry, but the heads of the EBU, children's and the health areas, children's health and safety areas, have really said no to this. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. You're going to have to reanimate or find another way around that problem, but you cannot show the weasel getting drunk because it's just bad news for children's programming." And he went on he then phoned me and I said, "Yes, that's it. And he goes apoplectic. He is spherical. He's floating up in the air in rage. And he's walking around the studio using a number of words which weren't French. And at which point one of the animators said, "I think there's something sticking to your back." And he looked round and he saw this paper fish and realised it was a poisson avril. So, anyway, I don't know. Do you cut on this? Or?
No, I cut afterwards.
Yeah.
No, what was it? So they ordered one season, and it was a big hit after one season, and they ordered more?
Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they were the audience figures were, for those days, I forget the number now. We used to get reports from the people, but all over Europe it was going down a storm. They loved it. Mm. There were disadvantages, though. Certainly in one of the later ones. I'm back home in Blewbury, and at 10 o'clock that night, the phone rings, and this man's voice says, "Hello, is that Mr. Elphin-Lloyd Jones, director of the Animals of Farthing Wood?" I said, "Yes, you're speaking to him." He said, "I've got somebody who wants to talk to you." I said, "Oh, right." Well, I'm curious. And this little voice comes on. She's about 2. And she says, "Why did you kill Badger?" So, and I'm not at my best at 10 o'clock at night. and actually, oh, crumbs. So, but her father obviously couldn't cope. And I'll find him. So he must have researched how the hell he found me in Blewbury. Mm-hmm. But he nobbled me at 10 o'clock that night with his daughter on the phone, you see. And I had to say, well, something to the effect of, well, it's a part of life, you know. Badger was very, very, very old and was coming to the end of his life, which happens when people get very, very old and this sort of thing. And it's a natural thing, and it does happen. Oh, you see, and I thought, I don't think I've convinced her, because after all, her favourite badger's gone. But I did the best I could under the circumstances.
Yeah. Were you nominated for it? Did you win a BAFTA for it?
We were nominated for a BAFTA, yes. Yeah. It used to be in the loo. But I don't know where it is at the moment. It's somewhere.
Well, yeah. No, and so the show had a simultaneous release in all the countries?
Pretty near, I think. I'm not sure of the accuracy of that, but they were all going out pretty near at the same time. I mean, all the countries had put in their money and support behind it, and all credit to the heads of the children's programming departments. They were brilliant people. They really were. They're committed to the job and the full realization of how important it was, because these things were going out to children, and they had a heck of a responsibility, as we did, of course.
And did the writer like it?
Yes, he did. Yes. I met him a number of times. A very, very nice man, Colin. Very quiet man. For a book that has so much natural violence, I call it. Colin, the author, I think would have probably burst into tears if he accidentally killed a fly.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and were you an artistic kid from the start?
Unfortunately, yes. It was the only thing I could do, because I kept managing to fail most exams, much to the despair of my parents. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not academic and I'm not that bright, but I could draw. I would say that it was a bit like an entertainer, a performing dog. And as a child, I would draw with both hands at the same time, just showing off. As I said, it was a great relief when that wore off. I find it was difficult enough drawing with one hand now. But no, that's... my mother was an art teacher and passionate about art, and my father was a writer and journalist. So I came from a book education-minded background, and really all I did was draw. In school, I found that it's only later I realized that it wasn't because I was thick, it was because I wasn't interested. But I was interested in so many other things. But you shove an exam sheet in front of me, and I didn't care.
Yeah. You told me you came from a house with 1,000 books.
About 10,000 books in it.
10,000 books.
My father loved books. From his background, he had a tough life. Wales through the Depression years, and he educated himself and eventually went to college. And so books were very important. And part of his, as a freelance journalist, he opened a bookshop in a little market town, a little seaside town in North Wales, in Bahamas, and he had a bookshop there. And when we moved into a place called Dolgellau in Merionethshire, Sir Merioneth, all the books, he couldn't bear to lose all the books. So, of course, they were all up in the loft, which is where I spent my childhood. No rules.
Yeah.
I could read whatever I wanted, for which I'm very grateful for. Maybe some other people weren't. Early teens, I discovered the magic of, to me, which was fascinating, surrealism, Dadaism, Salvador Dali, Apollinaire, André Breton. I began reading and looking at their stuff, and I was totally entranced. It ticked all the boxes in a little rebellious Welsh boy. There is automatic, stream of consciousness stuff. So I would create, very badly, of course, surreal paintings, that's a big, which went to school friends and the like. And I decided in my stupidity that I didn't want to go to art college. And eventually I bowed down to pressure from parental pressure saying, well, you've got to get a job somehow.
Yeah.
So I went to train as a teacher, and as an art teacher, but really, my heart wasn't in it. I realized very quickly, a wonderful job, but it's not for me. I need to be doing it rather than teaching, because I don't think I could be a very good teacher anyway. So eventually I came out of that, and I started freelance drawing. And I found my first job was for the BBC in Wales. They had a program in Welsh called Heddiw, which translates as today, and it was a miscellany of all sorts of things. And we're now talking, before your time, Xander, we're now talking black and white television.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
And they very generously took me on as a test and sent me a script in Welsh and said, here's a song we want to film, but we've got a wonderful singer who's going to be singing this song, and we need about 12 or 15 black and white or monotone illustrations to go with it. This was my test. And the song was called Dafydd y Garreg Wen. It's a very, very famous Welsh song, David of the White Rock. Very poignant, highly emotional, beautiful language, wonderful, wonderful tune. So I enjoyed doing that, and I sent the illustrations back after, again, the scripts arrives on Friday morning. I have to put them on a train on Monday morning, and I've got 15 odd illustrations to do in that time, which means no sleep. But if you're desperate,
Yeah.
you work like hell.
Yeah.
So they liked it. So I did a lot of stuff for them. There was a period in Liverpool in the 1960s where I first discovered the true magic of live theatre. And I used to, as often as I could put two pennies together, I would go and sit up in what they call the gods, the cheaper seats. And I was entranced. And for a while, I really thought, I don't want to be a teacher. I love art. That's the only thing I feel I can do. But I think I might be an actor if I was trained, you see. And I mentioned this to my lecturers, and they said, well, I'm afraid, this was the 1960s, don't forget, I'm afraid with that Welsh accent of yours, you'll never get onto the stage. It's such a strong Welsh accent. But what we'll do, and they very generously, knowing probably that I wasn't going to go anywhere but them academically, they organised an elocution lecture for me. And for a number of years, this brilliant man used to ask me to read poetry and would suggest different ways, And the Welsh are natural mimics, I think. At the end of this time, am I allowed to say that word on your podcast?
Of course, you can say any
It's
word.
an adult podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the end of all this period, this brilliant man leans back in his seat and says, Elphin, he said, I think to date you are one of my prize pupils. I am absolutely delighted. You have now ended up with an accent of refined Northern English. And if you want to go on the stage, you go ahead. He said, there is one downfall. And I said, what's that? Well, he said, in the process of elocuting you, I have fucked up an absolutely wonderful Welsh accent.
And what came after the black and white drawings? What was the first big one?
I was a bit lost still, and the work was petering out, and I came across an advert in one of the newspapers saying, animation director wanted. However, I've always been fascinated. While I was in Liverpool, I spent a lot of time in the Walker Art Gallery and the libraries there. Again, books, and I discovered a book by a chap called Edward Muybridge, who was a photographer in the 1800s, middle 1800s, and these books of animals in motion. What he'd done with plate cameras, scores of them set up in a line against a squared background, and he would get a trained horse to run across, to gallop across or trot, and every time the horse hit a wire, it would shoot that pose. So for the first time, I'm looking at this animation, and it was really Muybridge that got me. I'd always played with, on the end of a book, the little drawings of, ships and birds when you flick the pages. But all of a sudden, the concept of actually creating a world in animation, which was so rounded, background, story, voice, music, it's a whole world, and it's a powerful world, and there are no limits. You may not be able to sell it, but at least there are no limits. And that's where my first interest went. So I came across this advert, and the other one which I'd put aside was peripatetic school teacher needed in the Falkland Islands. And in brackets it had ability to ride a pony, an advantage. Now I thought, I think I could blag my way through that. So it was a toss-up between the Falkland Islands or coming down to London. And I'm a boy from the sticks, I find myself in Wardour Street, Filmland, and I walk into this oak-panelled office where it oozed wealth and, success. And I meet this gentleman who says, I'm live action, he's a documentarist, but I've been always interested in animation. What can you do? I said, just point me out what you want done. I said, there were scores of people coming up for the interview, apparently. So I didn't realise that I was really bottom of the list here. And he said, we hung about for the rest of the day while other people were being interviewed. And at the end of the day, he said, look, we're down to 5 people. You're one of them. But we're asking every person who's applied to come up with, by Monday, with character designs, a storyboard for a fairy tale. And I said, no problem. What time Monday? This was Friday, of course. So here we go again, on the train, back up to, in this case, I was living in Shropshire, and no studio or anything, but I had got a paint box, and I got paper. So I sat down, again, working through the night, and created a storyboard and designed characters and a background for Jack and the Beanstalk. I mean, looking back on it, it was pretty naff, but at least I'd achieved it. So Monday morning, with no sleep, I'm back on the station, and I'm back into London, walking up Wardour Street to this office, saying, trying to look as if I'd actually slept, and handed this in and said, have a cup of coffee. Fine. So I had a cup of coffee. And about an hour later, I'm again interviewed by this gentleman who was very dapper, beautiful grey suit and all that, one's ideal of a successful producer. And he said, he said, you're the only one who's come back. He said, you're the only person who actually put his mind to doing it. The others either didn't want to or couldn't. So he said, you've got the job. So without ever animating anything in my life, I'm suddenly the director of this tiny fledgling company. and he didn't want what we know now, or what I knew later, of course, my training was that he didn't want full-fledged animation anyway. What he wanted was illustration, shoot them in colour and edit them into just pictures with a voiceover and all that. It was pretty simple stuff. And I said, well, we actually do need a background artist because I can do the characters, I can time it, I can storyboard it, I can do all those things, but if you ask me to do the background as well, I said, it's really physically impossible. You'll be waiting for ages before we get anything out of the camera. And we advertised, and a number of people came up, and one of them was a lady who was trained in Salford as a textile designer. But when she came down to London, she worked with an animation company called Captain Pugwash, which was making a series of films for BBC, Captain Pugwash. And it was very famous in its day. But there wasn't so much work coming through for her, so she applied for this job. And again, by Monday morning, she'd arrived with these back. I'd never seen anything like it. And I realized just how much I had to learn. Because I'm looking at somebody who really knew how to paint.
Yeah.
So we fell for each other, and we got married. So that was the story of Kate, with meeting Kate, my first wife, who I adored, and sadly lost over 13 years later.
And this was somewhere in the early 60s?
I was 28 when I got married. So you're better at maths than I am.
Well, no, I think I saw somewhere that the Jack and the Beanstalk got used.
Did it?
I think it did.
Well, what a pity. I thought it was rubbish.
I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere you did some work on a Jack and the Beanstalk short, Puss in Boots short, a Tin Man.
Probably.
Short, yeah, probably. But yeah, I saw it somewhere on a BFI site with credits. And this is early 60s.
Very early days.
Yeah, maybe later 60s.
That company survived a few years, and I learned a lot. But what was more important was I learned how not to do it. And eventually, Hallis and Batchelor, who John Hallis produced and directed the first major feature film in Britain, called The Animals of Farthing Wood, from the book by George Orwell.
The Watership Down.
No, this was Animal Farm by
Animal Farm. Okay, yeah, sorry.
By George Orwell.
Yeah.
And of course, John already had an established studio. I mean, he was a worker, our John, a very enterprising, entrepreneurial chap. And I was very lucky to be taken on by him as not a full-fledged animator, which I really wasn't in those days. And I trained under some of the best in the country. Men and women who had been taught animation by an animation genius called Harold Whittaker, who lived in Stroud. He was a natural, a bit of a polymath, a wonderful man, immensely talented. And I was very lucky to be trained or to work with men like this who'd come up in the business the hard way, drawing, So eventually, because by my nature, I keep pushing to see where I can go, what I can do, and where I fail. And there is no production company in the world that is perfect. And of course, I saw the imperfections as well as the things that were going brilliantly. And I decided that really I could make just as big a mess of it as some of those could. So gradually, as I've got more confident and more training and more expertise, I'm still interested in stories, all the various other things in my life which fascinate me, music, sound, story, of course, is special. and gradually ended up directing for John Hallis for a number of short films. That was a privilege working with him. But we had, I really admired the man, but we had a difficult relationship because he insisted that he was always right. And the trouble was, I knew I was. And we could never agree on money.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll do it.
But in those days, most animators, apart from a few, were freelance. And Hallis survived in those days on big shows coming in from America, and that's where I did a lot of my early experience with big shows. How to organise them, produce them, work on them, and the mechanics, you know, the ground floor stuff. And the first one I think I did was Jackson 5, a big series of the Jackson 5. The boys were great to animate, and then we went on to the Osmond Brothers, and then gradually I ended up directing various other things for them. And would you like to hear the story of Genesis?
The full story of Genesis?
Not the full story.
It's a long book. No, of course, I want to hear it, yeah. Of course.
Well, one day John Hallis rang me and he said, because John's, I still do it. Although we've lost him so many years ago, I still do John's accent when he phones me. Elphin, dear boy, I've got something I want you to do. He said, what is it, John? Do you want me to clean the loos? And he said, no, I want you to go to... I said, I got it wrong when I was remembering it. It was Toronto. I want you to go to Toronto on Friday. I said, I haven't got a passport, visa, or whatever they have in Toronto. Do I need one? Don't worry, we'll get one for you. And in those days, strings were pulled. I ended up, at the end of the week, with a passport on an aeroplane, flying across the Atlantic to try to win a contract for the Hallis and Batchelor Company. And I knew nothing about the film. I didn't have any idea why I was halfway across the Atlantic. I was just told, go and find out. And I'm halfway across the Atlantic when the captain... no, I'm in the airport. Sorry, backtracking. I'm in the airport and the flight to Toronto has left by 1 minute. And I thought, well, that's not good. I go to the desk. Well, there's a flight leaving for New York. You can catch that if you run. Now, again, it's the impetuosity of youth, isn't it? So I run, and I get into this airplane going to New York, literally as the doors are closing. And I'm halfway across the Atlantic, and I'm looking in the brochure, where the hell's Toronto in relation to New York? You know, the map you get in the pocket. I say, wow, that's a long way. I've got to find a way how to get from New York to Toronto.
Yeah.
And we are 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic, and the captain comes on to the intercom and says, I'm awfully sorry, but New York is snowed in. We're going to have to divert to Toronto. And I thought, well, that's a good sign. The fates are with you. So the next morning, slightly bleary-eyed, I walk into this meeting with these people who are proposing to make a film. Their contract as producers was to film the whole of the Bible.
Yeah.
But they worked out that trying to film Genesis would take up 90% of the budget. So they decided to try and do it in animation, which is why I was called in for John Hallis. And that's another story. But it shows you how the lottery of life, well, you never know, do you?
So around what time did you start your own company?
Let me see. as you know, I'm hopeless at dates.
It's okay.
I started one company. I started my own, of course, as a freelance. I ran my own as Elphin Productions from my home and studio in Surbiton then. And then I moved into London. I found that, it was so expensive in the middle of London that really it was a nonsense to try and run a show from there. So I went back to my studio and I just kept working. But what I did do was every penny that the taxman left me, which wasn't that much, I would invest in new ideas. And gradually I got a reputation in the business, all areas of it, like cameramen, producers, directors, animators, whatever, that I was a gambler. If the idea was strong enough, I take it and I develop it to a pitch where you could put it in front of a client with all the maths done, the production schedule, the illustrations, the storyboard, voices, everything organized. It's to take the stress and the worry and the gamble out of it for a client. That was the first thing I learned. Take that worry off their plate and show them that you know what you're doing. It makes it a lot easier. And eventually a suggestion for a film came up in script form. And I looked at it overnight and I can smell a kernel, a little something in there that might work. And I knew I could see the characters that I could design for it. So I said yes. And we eventually created a company called Ten Imagination with my co-director doing the teleworks. And that's how I came across a lovely lady, Teresa Plummer Andrews, who was working for a company called Television South in those days. She was in charge of board programs. And we had this little film, a 2 or 3 minute pilot film of the teleworks that we paid for and animated. And I did the lot because it was cheaper that way. It was all a gamble. And I phoned up Television South and I was told, the person you need to speak to is Teresa, but she's going to Cannes the next day for the Cannes Film Festival, which is her job, But she said, I'll pass you on to her. So this lady came on the line and I said, I've got a little show. It's only a few minutes. I said, can you spare? She said, you're lucky I'm round the corner because later this afternoon I'm on the flight to Nice. I said, but she popped in, had a cup of coffee, looked at it and said, I like it. I think it's got legs, but I need to talk to my upper echelon. And what happened was it just grew. And Television South offered us a contract for a serious amount of money to make a whole series of it. And that's how the first major studio started.
What was the show about?
Well, they were. I showed you the poster. The telebugs. These little robotic creatures who had adventures, and it went down quite well. The audience liked it, and Television South liked it. But Television South wasn't destined to survive.
I'm gonna let you light your cigarette, by the way.
You're allowed to put that on a podcast.
They heard you clicking and rolling it.
Can I relieve anyone who is anti-smoking that I don't exhale?
I was wondering where it went.
You saw my eyeballs bulge. I always have backup. What else would you like to know?
Well, I'm thinking about the timeline. So it's telebugs, and I guess Animals of Farthing what came after that. So the big one that's missing, and another one of my personal favorites is Noah's Island.
Oh, right. Well, that's a silly story.
You're going to tell it anyway.
It's sillier than the others. But well, my co-director, who was the business side of it, he was good with numbers, this sort of thing. And he'd come across a big organisation in the city called the Milk Marketing Board. which was really the central office for milk production and organised, that sort of thing. I didn't know how it worked, but it was obviously a very strong, big organisation, the Milk Marketing Board. He said, I think we've got a chance to make a pitch for them. So can you come up with an idea by the end of the week? It's now Tuesday.
These deadlines are insane.
What we need is a concept, an animated film concept, which will focus around milk, but is fun for children. And I said, okay, just breezy optimism, hoping something would happen. I took the train home. Coming in the next morning, I'm looking out of the train window, and I think, oh, milk, okay. And I'm looking. Honestly, what happened was I'm looking up at the sky, waiting, hoping something would, flash of light, and I'm watching the clouds. And the clouds, I draw it to this day, the cloud was shaped like that. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, that's an interesting shape. I've forgotten all about milk by this time. You see, my mind's drifted off on clouds and shapes. And in my mind's eye, I'm playing cameras with it. I'm going into the cloud and I'm breaking it up. This wonderful shape, which looked like a boat. And as the cloud is diffusing, I see an image of an island. Noah's Island. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where I was going, but I start then, by the time I get off the train, I populated that island with characters. I populated it with a story, and I have an image of where they live. It's a floating island, powered by a volcanic core, which can move it around. Obviously, they can't control it, but that's how it works. I'd got the sense of it, enough to be able to say, okay, I think I've got an idea. And I breezed into the studio, and something I'd learnt in the past was if I can't pitch the concept or the story within 2 minutes, forget it. Mm. If you can't get it over that succinctly, don't bother. Anyway, I pitched this in 2 minutes to my co-director, and he said, wow, he said, that's interesting. That really is interesting. But what's the fuck it got to do with milk? I said, it's only Wednesday. Let's see what happens. So again, the next morning, I'm on the train and I am not looking out of the window. It's too dangerous. I'm thinking we have a very famous toy shop in London called Hamley's. Mm-hmm. And I got off the train and I got a taxi up to Hamley's, and I went round, and I could not come across one soft toy, which was a cow. So gradually, in the process of walking up to the Hamleys and looking round this toy store, the concept of a super cow, who I called Mega Moo eventually, started to materialize. And by the time I got to the studio, the drawings were in my head, nothing practical laid down. Then I pitched it, and he said, I think you got it. By George, you got it. Yeah. So I sat down, storyboarding, designing the characters. And of course, if you've got a super cow, is she single? No. You pan across, and there's her husband, the bull, who's doing the washing up. We are way ahead of our time here. So this was the super cow, and a little door would open in a hayrick, and inside there's this up-to-the-date computer stuff, And we pitched the idea, and they loved it. Oh, yeah, we'd love to see an example of film, what it looks like on screen. No problem. So using, of course, we owned the company, so it was all our money. It was the tiles off the roof going into this film. Thousands of pounds worth of expensive animation and time. And we finished the film. And just at the same time, talking about lottery, this is where it doesn't always work. By the time we'd finished the film and got it into the can, the milk marketing board was disbanded. So it suddenly turned sour. So we then have a little chat, and we are coming to the end of Farthing Wood. And I said, well, you know that thing I came into a few weeks ago, or months ago, that concept? Well, I've been working on it in the odd moment and developing it. The island is beginning to work in my head. I can see the characters, I can see the story. I'd like a scriptwriter to have a go at it, and I think we should pitch it at the EBU. And as it turned out, we put a lot more of our remaining money into developing this. We got a scriptwriter, wonderful scriptwriter, and we got the drawings in and everything else. You saw some examples. Initially, I'd gone a more anthropomorphic route. All the animals had got little ribbons around their head with a little symbol, which was collectible, you know. Of course, and you knew who they were by their symbol, whatever, and their rules. But it was really the core of the concept, even when I got off the train, was I think I'm creating a democracy of animals, how they begin to work it out, how to live with each other in a complex world where they're all different, with all different needs, you know. And I said, the parallels are with us in our human life. So that's really what I was aiming at. And we eventually ended up pitching it to the EBU. And amazingly, they said, go ahead and do it.
I saw in one of your drawings you had a dinosaur drawn up for.
I went down all sorts of routes. Oblique thinking. I'm experimenting with dodos. I'm experimenting with polar bears. I'm experimenting with even a Tyrannosaurus Rex character, and I don't know what's fitting until eventually things start to congeal, and gradually it all comes together in a blob.
Yeah. Because I read like on a show like Animals of Farthing, because I never read the book. A lot of the characters got changed in sex, for example.
Yeah.
Because the book has a lot of male characters.
Yeah, loads of characters. Which of course makes it very expensive in hand-drawn animation. I mean, we were still in the old game of drawing on, which we still do, of course, but drawing on paper and translating it by wax pencil onto acetate. I mean, we're still way back in those days. You know, computers were computers in terms of animation were very new. I mean, to give you a good example, just before Farthing Wood, I had my own studio course up in Surbiton, and there was a Thames Television, another major television company, lived a few miles away from me, and they were always asking for animation for programs, and I did a lot of their title sequences and some short films for them. But one of the problems for graphics departments in the television world is they need to see things immediately, and animation is laborious, time-consuming, and even if you animate a scene of 30 seconds, it's got to be painted, traced, shot under camera, sent to the laboratory, edited, come back. It's days. But what the graphics departments did know, are you all right for length on this?
Oh yes. Yeah.
What the graphics department could appreciate was line tests. You know about line tests? If you don't go, well, let me put it. If you don't go to color and background, and you just shoot the animation in line form, pencil, frame by frame, which in the old days was under the rostrum camera, with just cheap stock, you could run it at 24 frames frames a second, and you got a pretty good idea of what the movement was like and what was happening. I discovered that Walt Disney had asked an engineer, a sound engineer, to help create them a line testing machine. And this was just a few lines, you know, in a magazine or something. And wow, I'd like to get one of those. that would change my life.
Yeah.
So I eventually found out where this was being made in America. And then there was a sort of tricky conversation with my wife, who, bless her, was a down-to-earth lady. Very talented, but down to earth. What, you mean you want to spend all the money that we've got saved on shipping over this unknown piece of machinery? I said, if it works, I said, it's going to mean a massive leap forward. She said, God, it's lucky I trust you. I forget how much it was, but it was a lot of money in those days, thousands of pounds, and I couldn't afford it, because if I spent that money on this machine, unknown machine coming over from the States, it meant I couldn't pay the tax bill.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, basically I could be screwed both ways.
Yeah.
So this thing arrived in massive boxes. I managed to put it together by reading the instructions. Fortunately, they weren't in a foreign language. They were American, which is almost equally indecipherable sometimes. And there came that tension moment where I switch on. And there's a loud humming sound, and there's a smell of sort of dust burning. And then it went... I thought, I've got some explaining to do. I explained what had happened, and she said, what can you do? She said, you can't get anyone over from America to mend it. I said, I'll go around my pals in the industry. And I went around about 5 or 6 people who were in the, the mixing departments or whatever, and they came up with a name, a chap called Steve White, who was quite brilliant in this area of electronics. What it was a flatbed magnetic tape recording from one reel horizontally to the other, but it could take images and you could play them back at 1/24th of a second. That's what I wanted. But I'd got a machine that was just slightly smoky. This young man arrives, and a cigarette dangling out of his lips. He was a fully paid up hippie, lovely bloke. And I said, help. And he's fiddling around. He said, okay, I've got an ironmonger's shop nearby. I said, yes. He said, go and get me some chicken wire. So I go down and I get this roll of chicken wire, and he makes this cage. He said, I've adapted the transformer. He said it wasn't really geared for British electricity or whatever, And he said, I put this cage over it so you don't electrocute yourself, but try it now. And we switched on, and it worked. And with the amount of line testing which the graphics department in that television company saw that year, I made the whole money back in 1 year. So it was, again, the lottery that worked.
Yeah.
Why do you keep digressing me into all these odd little stories?
I don't know. Like, yeah, it's poking the bear, Elphin. I know you're gonna digress to something. Was Noah's Island the last show you did?
The last big one, yes.
This is the late '90s, so
yeah. So I mean, by which time I'm really moving back from direction. It's a great job, very exciting. You're working with so many talented people with lots to give, and they're wonderful, highly talented people who are passionate about animation, passionate about movement. All animators in my book are actors. You know, you give a scene or you brief a scene to an animator, and they're the actor. It will come out their way, and their timing and their performance and expressions. It's the animator's way. All you can do is give them a layout and instruct them or brief them within your limitations, but you have to let them go, which is when you get the best out of them. Let them be. Sometimes it doesn't work, and one of the most expensive things that can go wrong in animation is having a scene on the cutting room floor, which you can't use. That's very pricey. But more often than not, these are also highly responsible people who know they're trying to fit in with the whole concept of the film. They understand the storyboard. They understand the performance that's needed from this character. So that's what you get.
What do you think of animation now? Do you still watch a lot of animated stuff?
Yes, I do. Obviously, there's wonderful stuff. You know, Pixar and Disney and many in Europe. I mean, Europe has so many fine animation studios. Brilliant people. I've worked with animators from Italy, Germany, France, Czechoslovakia, and Russia, and I've just found them all of the same mind. It's not about anything else. It's about enjoying what you're doing, creating, moving, performance.
Have you seen the Into the Spider-Verse movie?
No.
Spider-Man? I think you will like it.
Oh, no, the live action.
No, not the live action, the animated Spider-Man movie.
My grandson insisted I watch the live action one.
No Way Home, yeah. That's also fun, but...
fun, yes, but it was too fast for me.
I can get that. No, the animated movie, Into the Spider-Verse.
No, I haven't seen that yet.
I think you will like it for the animation.
I'll put it up. I'll have a look at it. But no, eventually I move out. I hand over directing on Noah's eventually to another animator, and I move back into what was really fun, was coming up with ideas and seeing what happened. And I suppose that's really how it ended. You know, eventually it fizzled out. They all have their own life, these companies, and yeah. We were asked to do some of the series on such really low budgets. Granted, as I said earlier, you know, the broadcasting unions are using public money, and they have to be careful. So their budget wasn't workable in our country, and I was disenchanted by the end, to be quite honest with you, because we were being offered budgets where we had to go to China. We would create the film in this country, the layout and everything else, but we'd have to go to China or wherever for it to be animated. I've got no problem with any country in the world that's animating, but I just think this country is perfectly capable of animating its own films. It has the talent, and it's capable of producing for its own culture and selling it to a broader audience. Many years ago, we got shifted down to Cannes. The EBU asked us to present The Animals of Farthing Wood to Cannes Film Festival. And at the end of it, there was a press conference. I say hello, really, and sort of trying desperately to shudder away. And Philippe was with me, and the Parisian reporter asked Philippe, "Well, Philippe, Mr. Leclerc, how do you find it working with the British?" And Philippe's response was, "Well, I think it's the best collaboration that the British and the French have had since we burnt Joan of Arc."
Well, maybe a finishing note or something to close it off.
What can you think of?
No, just thinking, how long have you been retired now, officially?
Must be about 15 years.
But you still do it. You still draw. You still...
Every day.
You can't stop.
I can't do anything else. Once the mind stops, the ideas stop. So I've got nothing to draw around.
Is there, now looking back, something you always wanted to do? Like, I noticed you have a pretty good gaming PC.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just love the top end, like things like some of the Assassin's Creed, and the graphics are gorgeous, and the storylines are wonderful. Really, I mean, gosh, as I said last night, that would be the area I would have gone in for.
Video game animation.
Yeah, big stories with the player online with groups of actually taking up part. The idea that decades ago, I come from early computers, the clunk ones, and I drew out once this desk, a circular desk with rails on the floor, with a seat which went along the rails from screen to screen, and I'd got all these images, and the technology wasn't there, of course. It was just all dream work. I thought, what would be lovely is you could take a photograph of your face all the way around, feed it into the computer as a wireframe, and have your face being the central character in the film. The story, it's not there yet even, but that was an idea 40 years ago.
Well, maybe we can play Assassin's Creed Valhalla sometime through the internet.
You have to teach me how to do it. Because I've only played online once in my life. I played a thing called Empires or something, with all the tiny people running around, and I was quite good at it.
Age of Empires.
Yes, that's right. Age of Empires it was. And it was a very early one.
Yeah.
And I decided to experiment online, first time. And I got my little men, and they'd got their stone axes, and then they gravitated up to little leather shields and iron axes, and over the hill comes all these men in crusader uniforms with swords. And I go, oh, well. There is no way whoever it was had to have cheated. I wasn't savvy enough to know how to do the same.
Well, this was a lot of fun, Elphin. Traveling here, meeting you.
It's been a great pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And, what's better, I can sit here, have a coffee and a Guinness and gas bag about myself. It's such a balm for the ego.
This was Ben je nog aan het kijken for this season. For the people interested, The Animals of Farthing can be found on DVD or on YouTube. Ben je nog aan het kijken will return for a 4th season, including video and some live shows later this year. I would like to thank all my guests this season. Of course, Jens Pioneers for all the mixing, all the people supporting on Patreon, and of course you for listening. Don't hesitate to drop something on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or our Discord if you enjoyed this season and want to share it with your followers. I was your host Xander de Rijke, and we'll binge again later this year.
Met Xander de Rijke.